Okay, so welcome to the last day of PQCrypto 2020. We are going to start with the closing remarks and an introduction to PQCrypto 2021. We do this before the end of a conference to give a chance for most people in the world to listen to the live. And I would really like to thank everybody here who contributed to this conference to make it a success. All people who submitted papers, the authors, the invited speakers, the program committee, and the organizer who had first to organize a conference in the usual sense and then had to organize a virtual conference, especially Nicolas Sandrier, who was kept extremely busy by all these things. So thank you, really, everybody. But let us see now how PQCrypto 2021 will look like. So, Kwangjo, you are going to present it.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, anyway. So we have 3 different time zone. I'm nighttime. I'm a general co-chair of PQCrypto 2021. It's a 12th international conference on post-quantum cryptology. It is held in Daejeon, Korea. We just finished to open the domain pqcrypto2021.kr. It will be open soon. Next slide. Alex switch. The Dresden, we have a very big 5 city in Korea. So KAIST is located there. The date, the PQCrypto 21 is July 22, for 3 days. That time, we have a summer break, so we can use the KAIST campus facility. We have 2 general chairs, myself and another Professor Choi from ETRI. And also we have 2 program co-chairs, Jeong and Jean-Pierre will continue one more time. I expect many local sponsors support us, including my university, ETRI, Korea Institute of Information Security and Cryptology, and the local government. The climate is very good, just the start of summer and the rain. So I have a lot of experience to organize international conference, Asia Crypt, PKC, and CHESS. This is my final chance to serve international conference as a fellow of IICR. Dr. Choi, he's a principal researcher in ETRI, working as a professor. He has some experience in local organizing conference. Another 2 key persons, the program co-chairs. Professor Zhang is also very famous cryptography in the world. He is a full professor at the Department of Mathematical Science, Seoul National University. He also a lot of experience to serve the program co-chair and the program members of the international conference. I don't need to introduce Jean-Pierre, So the Incheon, you can arrive by flight. You can take the train, very high left train or bus. It will take 2 or 3 hours, depending on the transportations. There's an area we say the heart of science innovation. We have 1,400 companies, 7 R&D institutes, 19 universities. So we have that looks like Silicon Valley. So KAIST campus located here in the ETRIs. We have a closed hotel and a lot of rooms available. Finally, I like to strongly hope to see all of you PQCrypto 2021 in Daejeon and Korea, if we can conquer the COVID-19 anyway. But the plan B, just in case, we will prepare in the virtual conference almost the same time. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to this invited talk session. So I'm very happy to introduce Dustin Moody from the NIST, who will talk about the NIST post-quantum standardization process. If you have questions during the talk or after, please use the Mattermost chat. And hopefully we'll have something like 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the talk to handle questions. Okay, so Dustin, you are now presenter. Can you upload your slides, or can you do something with your slides? Or
they should be there already, but I can upload them again.
Excellent, I see them.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to PQCrypto for giving NIST the opportunity to have a talk. This workshop's been organized very well, and even though we can't be there in person, we're glad we can still all get together and talk. I hope to be able to give a sufficient amount of time at the end for people to ask questions. NIST very much wants to get feedback from people and answer any questions that we can, so we can make sure this standardization process is as good as possible. So my name's Dustin Moody, and I'm speaking on behalf of our PQC team. I'm sure I don't need to give any introduction to why we're here. Just as a reminder, NIST has some standards that have public key cryptography. These are in SP 856A, 56B, and also in FIPS 186. So this includes digital signatures as well as public key encryption and key establishment algorithms based on discrete log algorithms. So NIST has a variety of crypto standards, but these are obviously the ones that would be vulnerable and need to be replaced. So in our standardization effort that we're doing, these are the functionalities that we are focused on first. So NIST has a variety of documents. We have FIPS, which are Federal Information Processing Standards. They're our most formal documents. For example, FIPS 186, the digital signature standard, specifies several digital signatures. We also have special publications, which are SPs. They're also considered standards. And we have other documents like NISTers, which stand for basically just a report that we put out. Of interest to probably many people is NISTer 7977. It's a document that outlines how NIST comes up with our standards, how we develop them, how we cooperate with other standards organizations. In particular, Section 7 talks about how NIST sometimes uses competitions or processes that are like competitions to come up with standards. We also outline the principles that NIST will follow in generating these standards, so they're listed there. Primarily, our stakeholders are officially the US government, since we're an agency of the government, and we want our standards are meant to let other agencies of the government know how to safely use cryptography. But we know that more broadly, industry and other groups and organizations around the world use the standards that NIST has. So in dealing with our post-quantum cryptography standardization project, often called a competition, just thought I'd go over the timeline real quick to get us all on the same page. So the project started even back as far as 2010. NIST had some researchers publish a survey paper. After that time, we started assembling our team and getting up to speed, so we would be able to do work in the future. In April of 2015, we held our first public workshop. Shortly thereafter, in February, right before PQCrypto in Japan of that year, we published a report outlining our initial thoughts and stating that we would soon be taking more concrete steps to create standards. We announced that at PQCrypto, got a lot of good reception and a lot of questions from the people there. And later on that year, we finalized the evaluation criteria and submission requirements. And that gave people about a year to come up with submissions based on the requirements that there would be there. In November of 2017, we received 82 submissions. We accepted 69 of them as having met our criteria for submission. A few months later, we held a workshop in April that was co-located with PQCrypto in Florida. Then in about a year later, the first round ended and we advanced to the second round and 26 algorithms were selected. We documented the selection and our reasoning behind it in NIST 8240. We again held a workshop in the middle of the second round, co-located with Crypto in August of 2019. And of course, more recently, just a couple months ago in July, we announced the algorithms that would be moving on to the third round. That included 7 finalists and 8 alternates, and we published NIST 8309, which gave our reasonings for our selections. So our evaluation criteria hasn't changed since the beginning when we published this. Number 1 is security. We want these crypto systems to be secure against both classical and quantum attacks. We defined 5 security categories, levels 1 through 5, that were related to the resources needed to break other standardized cryptography, namely AES and SHA that we have. We understand that it's not always easy to for sure know what security category a submission is, what security parameters are offering. But we ask submitters to focus on levels 1, 2, and 3, and levels 4 and 5 would be for high security. After security, there's various performance metrics that are of course important. These are measured on a variety of platforms, as well as things like how big are the keys, how big are the signatures, the ciphertexts, and so forth. And then besides these, there's just a variety of other properties that we would want as many of these satisfied, knowing that it's unlikely that every single one of these properties could be perhaps satisfied. Things like simplicity, flexibility, resistance to side channel attacks, as much as possible be a drop-in replacement for current existing crypto that we use, and so forth. So just a little quick recap of the first round. It was fun to post these, I think, back in December, and just a few short weeks later, in early January, cryptographers around the world had gotten to work and had attacked or broken a lot of these schemes. I think there were probably around 15 to 20 that had very significant attacks or were broken just in that very early stretch. One of the obvious things that we observed was there was a lot of similar schemes that were submitted. This was particularly the case for chems that were based on lattices. There was 21 different lattice-based chem or encryption schemes. Many of them were very similar, and that made it hard to compare always between these things. The workshop in Florida was a great success. Between PQCrypto and our workshop, there was 300 to 350 people who were there. We let all the submitters present, so that meant there was a huge number of presentations in a very short amount of time. That was a lot of fun. There was even a tornado warning when we were there, so that was interesting as well. We established the PQC forum, and there was a lot of communication on it. I counted over 300 official comments where people could make an official comment on an algorithm and it would be cataloged and saved, as well as over 900 posts on the forum for people asking questions or announcements or anything like that. There was also a lot of research done. There was initial benchmarking that was done. NIST is grateful for everyone doing all that work. And after about a year of the first round, we selected 26 schemes to move on. So here I have a list of all the first round candidates. So you can look at that and remember some of these schemes that were there early on that we don't see anymore. The ones that then moved on to the second round, a little hard to see perhaps, but they're colored in green. The schemes that didn't advance on, I crossed out. And the ones in orange were schemes that merged together. We had 4 mergers. In each case, a merge submission was advanced to the second round. So if we sort the second round candidates a little bit more, so they're kind of grouped more by the families that they belong to, we could see that we preserved the diversity from the first round. We still had a large number of lattice encryption and chem schemes. Even among the lattices, there was different flavors. There were some based on module LWE or LWR, some based on ring LWE, some that were unstructured. Some were based on NTRU or NTRU-like problems. We had Psych, which was an isogeny-based scheme. We had several code-based schemes. Again, the code-based schemes, there was different flavors of those. For signatures, we had 3 lattice-based schemes advancing on. There was 2 schemes that were based on more symmetric primitives, Sphinx Plus and Picnic. And there was also 4 multivariate schemes that advanced on, again, based on slightly different problems. But this kind of was how we viewed things internally. So the second round, as I mentioned, there were 4 merge submissions. That was NTRU, Decrypt, Rolo, and round 5. And we're thankful for those teams that combined together. And we thought that the outcome was positive and they had stronger specifications. For the second round, I counted 180 official comments. And I only counted 158 forum posts. I think maybe that number is a little low. Somehow I counted wrong. I think there was more than that on the PQC forum. Cryptanalysis still continued very strongly in the second round, even though a lot of these schemes that were selected were very promising. Several of them were attacked or even broken. We held our second workshop in Santa Barbara with crypto. Got a lot of good feedback there. Again, we thank everyone for all the research and all the work that was done. There was a lot of benchmarks that was done. There was real-world experiments taking some of these algorithms and putting them in protocols to see how they would run or how they wouldn't. And after about 1.5 years, we advanced 15 of these second-round algorithms onto the third round. So I'll talk a little bit more about that process of how we did that. First, just a little bit more detail on our second workshop. We had 23 papers accepted. We had a good industry panel. We want industry's feedback and to know some of their constraints for the applications they have. There was a variety of topics covered. We had updates presented from every team except for one. NTS Chem didn't have anybody who was able to make the workshop, so they gave us some slides that we shared. We also held a feedback session and gave a survey to all the participants there so we could get more public feedback and know which topics would be of interest or anything that we were overlooking or that people wanted to bring up and discuss with us. I listed several of these different topics here that we got from the feedback. Probably the main one that I remember was a general feeling that the community didn't want us at NIST to rush too quickly and select algorithms, that we still had time, that there needed to be more analysis done. So we took that message. We also had some questions about the third round. Up until that point, we hadn't been completely clear if there would be a third round or not. So shortly thereafter, we clarified that there would be a third round. And as part of that, based on some feedback, we also suggested that prior to us making a decision, we would set kind of a date where teams and researchers could let us know their results to ensure that we were aware of them before we would make any decisions. So we said that would be about April 15th. Of course, teams can always, announce results anytime, and we will take that into account. But we wanted to let people know when we would kind of be beginning our decision process. So as part of that, NIST, our internal team, we met regularly and we reviewed the submissions throughout the entire second rounds. We also talked about other research results and so forth. Starting in around April, we began to meet more frequently as we knew that we would be needing to decide here soon, and it had been over a year and into the second round. So we went over each specification. We looked at the changes or the tweaks that they had made for the second round, the official comments, things like that. By about the end of May, we had made our decisions. They weren't completely final at that point, but we began writing our second round report. And that wasn't an easy process to do. Our team has 14, 15 people. We'd had a lot of discussion back and forth. We discussed many things. We have different viewpoints. Our minds were changed often. And we wrote the report essentially as a group. And it's hard to write a good cohesive document with that many people to summarize everything that everybody is thinking, but we did the best that we could. A lot of our debate, besides which algorithm should move on or not, was around how to organize the finalists. We decided early on that we kind of wanted 2 tracks of algorithms to move on, but defining those tracks, defining what their names would be, kind of how we would select between them, what they would mean, and so on. There's a lot of internal debate about that, and the outcome was we ended up selecting algorithms to be finalists as well as algorithms to be alternates, besides removing some of the algorithms in the third round as well. Essentially, we were done by around June. By the end of June with the report, we revised it to our satisfaction. And then we had to go through our process to get our report published at NIST, and there's some bureaucratic steps that we have to go through to do that. And we finally announced our decision on July 22nd, where we made that announcement on the PQC forum. We also did receive input from the community at large as well. As I discussed, each submission team was able to make changes for round 2. And we looked at those tweaks and the explanations as to why they did that. There was a lot of discussion on the PQC forum. We're grateful for that. We think that's a great place to have discussions. And people can make official comments as well. We again looked at all the research that was done in workshops and in journals. And we talked to people. We had a lot of engagement from the community in general and from our stakeholders. Some of that feedback came from teams, outside researchers, and some of it came from the NSA as well. And we thought we'd mention that a little bit. There's been some discussion on the forum and other places, and so we thought we'd clarify that a little bit. NIST and the NSA do have a relationship. At times it's complex, but we do work together. The Federal Information Security Management Act tells us that we need to. Besides the fact that the NSA sets our government's national security algorithms, and some of those are taken from our NIST standards, so we have to work together for that reason as well. So as both being agencies of the government, we're working to provide strong cryptography. NIST does understand that the NSA has a different mission than NIST does, and so we certainly understand the concern that people have, and we share that concern as well to make sure that the standards that NIST we create are strong and that we have our own independent expertise to make sure that we are issuing strong standards. So we do our own analysis of what other people tell us. That includes NSA, submitters, other researchers. And we keep any non-NIST people out of our internal meetings and our meetings where we're making decisions about the standards. Again, that includes keeping the NSA out, and it includes keeping the submitters out, everyone. As part of our review of our report, as I mentioned, there's some steps we have to go through to get our report published. We have to have 2 different reviewers, one of which has to be outside of our division. We asked a mathematician at the NSA to review our report, and we did that in order that we would get a knowledgeable review back. That person provided feedback to us. Most of that was minor editorial feedback that you typically do when you give a review. The few things that weren't that, were all topics that we had discussed internally. There was nothing new brought up to us. It resulted in no substantive changes to our report, and it certainly didn't change any of the algorithm selections as finalists, as alternates, or as algorithms not moving on. Those were already in our report when we gave that to the reviewer, and they stayed the same. You know, there was no changes made in that. Weirdness, we can't speak for the NSAs. They have to speak for themselves. We encourage the NSA to make public their comments. You know, since we can't speak for the NSA, I don't know exactly what, but I assume that's what led to them making a forum post, and also to providing some guidance on their own webpage. But I just want to make clear again that NIST alone makes the PQC standardization decisions based on publicly available information, and we stand by our decisions. Input from people obviously can change our minds, can change our opinions, and so forth. When it does, we document that and we let you know that. We're committed to promoting the integrity and protecting the integrity of the standardization process, meaning we're not going to let anybody interfere with that. We're not going to let anybody manipulate it to get an unfair advantage, to weaken security, or anything like that. So again, just to remind you of the evaluation criteria that we did use to select the algorithms, we focused on security. There's a variety of different topics that you can look for. What security categories they're providing, are there security proofs, have there been any attacks, what's the classical and quantum complexity. We also looked at performance, the size of the parameters, the efficiency measured on a variety of platforms, again, how fast. This is both in software and hardware. We looked at particular algorithm and implementation characteristics. What are their advantages, their disadvantages? Are there any IP issues? Has there been any work done on side channel resistance? Has there been any, you know, how simple, how clear is the documentation, and so forth. So the first cuts we made were due for security concerns. So there were 6 algorithms that had been attacked. To a lesser extent, Lack and Round 5 also had some minor security algorithms that led Lack and Round 5 to also be among the first cuts that we had when making selections. So I'll just briefly review those. Most of you are probably aware of this. So Decrypt, there was a paper published in October 2019, or at least if it wasn't published, that's when it was posted. An attack by some of our NIST researchers and some of their colleagues. The Decrypt acknowledged that the attack worked, and so that was a big security concern for us. There was also Rollo and RQC. In March, Gabarit and some of his colleagues had posted some results, and later some of our internal NIST employees also contributed to expanding upon that. As a result, it broke the Rollo and the RQC parameters. They would need to make larger parameters to provide the amount of security that they would want. So that weakened our confidence in those algorithms. QTesla was more early on in the second round. There was a forum post by Vadim and Peter where they announced that they were able to break some of the QTesla parameters. QTesla acknowledged some of what they had said. They disagreed with some of the details, but they did confirm that the attack worked on the compressed key version. They ended up dropping some parameter sets, but ultimately NIST didn't have confidence in the security of QTesla either. Then there's LUOV. They had the great slogan, "All you need is love," but apparently love wasn't enough this time around. There was an attack by Jintai Ding. Later, I think he has another paper where he improved his attack. And so we decided not to keep LUOV, moving on to the third round. MQDSS had an attack from Greg Zavarucha and Daniel Kales. The MQDSS team confirmed the attack. It's kind of interesting that it didn't break the security proof, but it illustrated that there was a looseness in the security proof. So they announced that there needed to be more rounds, and but that would make the performance not as good, and especially in comparison to some other schemes that we had in there. So LAC, this is a slide from our second workshop, the NIST PQC Standardization workshop, where the LAC team themselves acknowledged that there had been a series of attacks on LAC. None of them were major, none of them outright broke it, but they had to adjust their parameters, and NIST didn't have full confidence in the design choices behind LAC. Round 5 had a minor attack announced also about the time of our second workshop. It didn't break the scheme either. Round 5 analyzed it and came back with a tighter concrete security analysis. They didn't need to change parameters. Nonetheless, when we compared round 5 to some of the other lattice chem algorithms that we have, we didn't find round 5 as promising as them. It had a more complicated specification. They weren't providing a royalty-free option. They had 3 different techniques for generating their public key matrix A, and we had questions about a couple of those techniques. So round 5 also didn't advance on to the 3rd round. Besides security, we also looked at performance. This chart on here, don't worry about trying to see numbers, it's just a graphic, but there was various schemes that in some way or another had large key sizes or had slow key gen or signing or verifying in some way. So we looked at that. Performance wasn't a primary factor in our decisions. In round 1, we did eliminate some schemes because we didn't think the performance would be acceptable in any application. In round 2, we didn't make decisions solely based on performance in any way. Security was more the criteria. We were aware of performance, but it wasn't the kind of the driving decision behind our selections. Some of the other schemes then that didn't make it on. So NTS Chem was a code-based scheme that was very, very similar to classic McLeese. We encouraged those 2 schemes to talk to each other and to merge, and we're happy to see that they successfully did so. They ended up electing to just keep the classic McLeese submission, and it was selected to advance on into the 3rd round as a finalist. 3 Bears was a very nice lattice-based scheme. It's kind of a different sort of lattice scheme. We still think it's a very good scheme. It's very interesting. It performs very well. But we didn't think there had been enough independent analysis where we could have confidence in 3 Bears in comparison to the lattice-based schemes that we did advance on. NewHope, another very, very good scheme. The lattice chem category was tough, and we felt we needed to make cuts to narrow it down to a small number so we could focus analysis. There was a security reduction that, essentially, without getting too technical, it says that module LWE is always at least as good as ring-based LWE. And it's a very good reduction. There are some caveats and so forth, but in looking at that, we concluded that the other module LWE and LWR schemes that we selected, we had slightly more preference for selecting them in comparison to NewHope. That was one of the tougher cuts that we had to make. So we organized this into 2 tracks again. The first one we called finalists, and we described this as algorithms that we felt could be standardized at the end of the 3rd round, and that were also the ones that were more promising to fit the majority of use cases. The other track, we looked for a name for a time and then settled on alternates. The crucial point was we wanted to keep them involved in the standardization process, but we didn't quite consider them finalists. For every algorithm that we selected as an alternate, the crucial point for us is we had to believe that there was some path that could eventually lead to that algorithm being standardized. If that path wasn't there, we wouldn't have kept it into the 3rd round. We want to say these are not just algorithms that we kept around because we thought they're interesting or that they should have further research. That is true, but we think there is a path for each one of these different algorithms. Some of the algorithms that didn't make it on we think are interesting, we think should continue to be researched. Nonetheless, this is the way we ended up organizing these 2 things. Again, we had a lot of internal debate about this. We're still not sure if it was the absolute best way to do it, but nonetheless, that's what we ultimately decided. So just looking at the lattice-based chems that did advance on. So the 3 finalists were Crystals Kyber, Saber, and Entrue. All 3 we felt we have confidence in their security. We thought they had great all-around performance, and so we selected them as finalists. Entrue, we did note that in general it appears to be just a little bit behind in its performance, but Entrue has also been around longer and has had more analysis done on it. Its IP situation is also more clear, so there's some advantages there as well. It's also based on a different problem than LWE, LWR, the Entrue problem, providing a diversity of security problems. We selected Frotochem. It's a more conservative in terms of security. So in case there's any results that threaten, structured lattices, Frotochem likely could still be around in that case. We don't think Frotochem needs to do a lot necessarily, but we selected them as an alternate. They have larger key sizes, slightly slower performance, and is a trade-off. Entrue Prime is another structured lattice-based scheme. They made different design choices than many of the other lattice-based schemes. We're still have some questions about Entrue Prime, but it also has very good performance, and so we kept it around as an alternate. Looking at the isogeny and code-based chems that advanced, Psych is still a good scheme. Its security problem is perhaps newer than some of the other schemes in the process. There's been more research done in the past few years to get more confidence in it. It has great key sizes. It is an order of magnitude slower than many of its competitors. So Psych is still very promising. It could be standardized in the future, but we put it as an alternate. Classic Release we selected as a finalist. It's one of the oldest submissions, or in terms of it's based on one of the oldest crypto systems out there in terms of public key crypto. It does have very large public keys, but its ciphertexts, I believe, are the smallest out of all the possible schemes. So for certain applications, even though there's a large public key, the small ciphertext might be a very good fit. Bike and HQC were the 2 remaining code-based chems. We felt that both needed a little bit more study, a little bit more time to mature to work out some of the issues that were with them. We think they make a great possibility for being standardized as an alternate to lattice-based cryptography. It's got good all-around performance. So it's very likely Bike or HQC, one of them could be standardized after the 4th round. Looking at the signatures, we had a smaller number of signatures to select. We had 3 lattice-based ones, and we removed QTesla, and that leaves Crystals, Dilithium, and Falcon. Both we feel are balanced, good-performing schemes. There's some questions about, are they providing enough security to reach Category 1? Some of that is shared also with some of the lattice chems. We've discussed that a little bit in the forum, and we're interested to see when they submit their official round 3 tweaks, if they've adjusted things. Nonetheless, Dilithium and Falcon both appear quite promising to us. Sphinx and Picnic. Sphinx is very, very stable. It's got very conservative security. It's a little bit larger and slower. It was on the boundary. It was close to being a finalist, but we ultimately selected it to being an alternate. We don't think they need to change very much because its security is so well understood. Picnic, we think, needs a little bit more time, has a lot of potential. Seems every so often more research is coming out that speeds it up, makes it smaller. So we want to see how that turns out. Rainbow and Gems are both similar, that they have large public keys and small signatures. We thought Rainbow was just a little bit better than Gems, so we selected it as a finalist. We wanted to ensure that we didn't have just lattice-based signatures, so we needed to include another algorithm there as a finalist. So the overall picture again there, I've listed the finalists and the signatures. Because Kyber, Entrue, and Saber are all lattice-based, structured lattice-based schemes, we expect to select at most 1 when we finish the third round for standardization. That's not saying we're for sure standardizing classic McLeese. We may or we may not, but we'll do at most one of Kyber, Enchu, and Saber. Similarly, in the signature category, we will standardize at most dilithium or Falcon, but not both of them. So the timeline, the third round will last about a year, year and a half, after which we will select which of the finalist algorithms we will standardize. We will have a fourth round where we will continue to study some of the alternates. We don't want to completely rule out that we cannot standardize an alternate at the end of the third round. We don't see that as likely, but perhaps there will be results in the third round which change our mind on that. The fourth round will similarly be about a year to a year and a half. We also want to mention, we think it's very likely we'll consider new schemes at some point as well. So it's been a number of years since schemes were allowed to be, introduced back in 2017. So we're going to try and make some plans where there could be new submissions that could be considered in the future as well. Reminder that tweaks are due by October 1st for those round 3 teams. We're going to hold a third standardization workshop sometime in spring, maybe early summer. The details of that haven't been finalized because everything's so much up in the air. But overall, we expect to release draft standards for public comment around 2022, 2023, and hope to have the final standard done by 2024. There's other work going on, of course. There's stateful hash-based signatures. Some of those have been standardized by the IETF. NIST has taken those ones that were selected by them, XMSS and LMS, and has created a document, SP 800-208, where we will approve those algorithms with certain parameter sets and limitations. We already received public comment on that. It's going through the final stages before it should be published. So we don't think stateful hash-based signatures should be used everywhere. They definitely should not, but there are applications where you can manage the risks of needing to have state and avoiding accidental one-time key reuse. We want to just highlight there's still many important research challenges. This list lists some of them. It obviously doesn't include everything. There's a lot of important work going on with security proofs in the ROM and QROM. The various lattice-based schemes often, and even code-based schemes, use different rings or modules or fields or different noise distributions and so forth. So far, there haven't been attacks that seem to exploit that, but that is always a possibility. One issue I mentioned already is there's some concern that some of the lattice-based schemes, their security might not be quite high enough. So we want people to look into that. We're looking into that as well at NIST. We want a lot more work done on side channel analysis, both protecting from attacks as well as attacks trying to see what you can do for the finalists and alternates. We hope now that there's a small number of algorithms, particularly the finalists, that people can really focus on that, do more implementations and benchmarking and so forth. There's various questions for specific algorithms that, there's issues that need to be worked out and looked at. There's many other challenges besides research. There's still some IP issues going on. There's some of the schemes are royalty-free. Others have some patents declared. We're working with submitters and other organizations to try and clear up as many of those issues as possible, but that's not always easy. But we are very actively doing that in the third round here. We want people to continue to benchmark, particularly in hardware. Previously, we've suggested the Arctic 7 and Cortex M4 might be good platforms to consider, so that then we can make comparisons between the different algorithms. We want to encourage real-world experiments. There have been a number of these already done with Google and Cisco and Amazon and others that have done this, and those are very good to try and work out ahead of time, any kinks that we can, as well as give us feedback on, are there constraints on the submissions? Are key sizes too big? Are they too slow? Anything like that. There's a lot of work going on about trying to know what's coming in for the transition and prepare for that. There's interest in hybrid solutions. That's been discussed a lot, and that is where you combine classical or what's currently standardized algorithms along with post-quantum algorithms. In our most recent update of SP 856C, that does now allow for hybrid solutions. Basically, what you end up doing there is you take a shared secret that's done using a conventional algorithm, something we've already standardized in 56A or 56B, so using something like ECDH or RSA, and you can combine it with another string. You can concatenate those two things together. For FIPS 140 validation, it doesn't matter what that other string is, but you could, for instance, use a post-quantum algorithm to create that string. You concatenate those two shared secrets, you run it through a KDF, and that's now a process is described in that document. We anticipate we will issue more guidance in the coming years. More in this direction as well. The NIST National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence is hosting a workshop in just a few weeks. That announcement's been made on the forum as well. So if you're interested in those sorts of topics, you can sign up to do that. It's just a short one-day workshop. So there are many things that organizations can do now to prepare. We know a transition's coming. We know we don't know the algorithms yet, but we'll know them soon enough. Nonetheless, organizations can look at what crypto they are using and start preparing for being crypto agile and needing to swap out for new algorithms. You can start experimenting and evaluating with some of these finalists and seeing if your IT staff is up to speed at everything. So maybe we can start to see some of the light at the end of this tunnel. The process isn't over yet. Even after we select the first algorithms to be standardized, there will still be more work done. We will standardize algorithms in the future. But nonetheless, we are in the third round, and we do have some finalists now. NIST is very, very grateful for all of your efforts. We certainly couldn't do this without you. You do a lot of work, and we're very, very grateful to that. So again, we have our webpage, and encourage you, if you haven't, sign up for the forum, and you can always contact us directly at that address. So with that, I'd be happy to take some questions in the time that remains.
Okay, thank you, Dustin. Thank you for this wonderful talk covering a massive amount of work. It's really obvious that it's taken a lot of time and a lot of energy from you and your team to organize this standardization process. So I think you deserve big thanks. Okay, so to the audience, if you have questions, don't hesitate asking them on the Mattermost. For the moment, there are not too many, so there is just one on the NSA interaction with NIST by Jacob Applebaum. So I'm going to read the question. It's a bit longer, but I don't want to cut it. So let me read it in full. Okay, so thank you for raising the issue of NSA interaction with NIST. I presume and hope that NIST is familiar with a recent paper by Dan Bernstein, a discretization attack, given the confirmed NSA subversion of the NIST standardization process, which has resulted in a worldwide loss of trust in NIST. It is my understanding that NIST committees have concluded that transparency is critical to developing new cryptographic standards. Okay, so here comes the questions. How has NIST considered this paper, and when will NIST adopt the strong defense as presented in the paper? When will NIST publish all NSA communication related to the NIST post-quantum crypto standardization process, and answer the outstanding questions about apparent NIST-NSA coordination? When will NIST disclose the contents of the communication between NSA and NIST? When will NIST provide transparency for all communications related to the NIST post-quantum crypto standardization process? Okay, so end of quote.
Okay, thanks, Jacob, for the question. I'll also mention my colleague Ray is available as well on here, and so he can chime in if he wants. And I see Daniel Smith-Toney is active on the chat, so they can chime in as well, so that it's not just me speaking if they want. Yeah, we are aware of that paper. Dan sent it to us in the forum earlier this week, so we've gotten a look at it. We will respond on the forum to some more of the points in detail, but we understand the concern that any interaction with the NSA, is a cause for people to wonder and worry. We share that concern as well. In terms of publishing all communication, we get lots of email. We don't think that, as part of being as open and transparent as possible, that means that every NIST employee needs to publish every email they get that's related to PQC in any way. People talk to us for a variety of reasons and in a variety of ways. We encourage people to be open and transparent, have discussions on the forum. Sometimes people don't feel comfortable discussing things on the forum for a variety of reasons, and so they send us a message. Other times there's other reasons why they don't want to do it publicly. We do encourage it to be as public as possible. We do want to emphasize that we do keep the NSA far out of this as possible. For most of the process, we don't have almost any discussion or interaction with them in any way. Before the process started, we used to more regularly meet, and then once our standardization effort started, we quit getting together and discussing research results and so on. Towards the end of a round, we will typically give the NSA just a short heads up. These are the algorithms we've selected. Sometimes they don't provide feedback. This is something we do with all of our standards, not just NIST, for the reasons that I mentioned, that we do have to work with the NSA. And in this case, again, they did give us a little bit of feedback. It wasn't anything that we hadn't known or discussed before. It was all just public information. I can't speak for the NSA, so I can't commit or anything to saying that I can release their emails or anything like that. They have other rules that they have to follow and so on. But we document our decisions in our report. We stand behind them, and again, I strongly say that we make the decisions independently, without feedback from the NSA or without others influencing us.
Okay, thank you for your reply. So I'm going to take another question on lattice schemes. So it's a question by Simon De Vries. On the mailing list, one of your colleagues cited a number of key deciding factors between lattice schemes in the final. Two of them dealt with the possibility of vulnerabilities related to lattice structure. Why hasn't NIST selected a candidate for the final based on unstructured lattices? Now all remaining candidates are based on structured lattices, which means that there is a risk of not stimulating research on this important topic. Besides, standardizing a chem that is not reliant on structured lattices, but that is more practical than Michaelis, may be beneficial for high assurance use cases.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. It is difficult when we were deciding between finalists and alternates. We wanted to focus attention on a small number, so we did have a small number of finalists. But we understood as well that that meant an algorithm that would be as an alternate might not receive as much attention, and we don't want that to be the case. We want the alternates to receive attention as well. So for example, Frodo, which is it's unstructured lattice, it wasn't selected as a finalist. That doesn't mean we don't like it. It doesn't mean it might not be standardized. It just means that we wanted to get first a general purpose algorithm that would be good for the majority of applications, standardized quicker. And we felt that the structured lattices were more promising for that. And so that's why we selected the three that we did. Frodo, certainly for high secure needs, it would make sense. And so that's why we selected it as an alternate. Alternatively, if there are some attacks which break some of the structured lattices in some way, Frodo's still there and could be standardized. So we don't mean to diminish Frodo or anything like that. We do want it to be studied, and it just wasn't the highest priority in terms of getting out the first standard.
Okay, thanks. I think you answered most of the question, but there was a side question on which was implicitly comparing Frodo to Michaelis. So let me go back to this. Standardizing a KEM that is not reliant on structured lattices, but that is more practical than Michaelis may be beneficial for high assurance use cases. So implicitly, why Michaelis rather than Frodo?
Yeah, so good question. I think we had a variety of reasons and opinions amongst us, but for me, what I remember is we wanted to have a finalist which was not just based on structured lattices or even unstructured lattices. We wanted a different security problem in general. So we thought class Michaelis would fit there. We know that it's got large key sizes, so for some application that's not going to work, but we also think with its very small ciphertext sizes and it's pretty efficient, that there are applications for which it could be useful. It's kind of a similar state for the signatures. Rainbow also has large keys but small signatures. So some applications that's okay. We don't think that's going to be the majority of applications, but we wanted to have diversity in our finalists. So that's what I would say for that.
Okay, thanks. So there are no more questions on the forum for the moment. So let me ask you one question of mine, which I've had in mind for quite a while and always puzzles me a little bit. So one of the criteria that you mentioned is misuse resistance. How do you measure this? Like, do you have social experiments? How do you assess misuse resistance?
That's a good question. Yeah, there's not probably anything objective that you can measure on misuse resistance. For that, I would say mostly we just look at research papers that have been done where if you're able to tweak something in an unexpected way, that it leads to bad results. So maybe an example of this is there are schemes that have decryption failure that's quite low, but if you are able to cause a decryption failure, you can sometimes use a technique like failure boosting to then induce more decryption failures, and that could lead to vulnerabilities. So yeah, it's hard to quantify, and I'm not the best person to probably answer that. If Ray wants to chime in, he could.
Okay, thanks.
It's hard to quantify misuse resistance. So you want me video?
Sure.
You can go.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's very difficult to quantify misuse resilience. I mean, so I think that, I mean, for decryption failures, so we also have the PA profile, and so that would be an example of something that has less in the way of misuse resilience. But you know, there's some, because there you actually have to prevent reuse of the key. Now there's a spectrum there. You could have things that are CPA, but you can use the key a small number of times and it's not a problem. I guess there's also side channel resistance. That's the other thing that is just sort of things can be implemented wrong. But yeah, I mean, it's a hard issue.
Okay, thanks. There is a new question by Andreas Kulsing. Okay, thanks for your talk. Your answers suggest that you considered signature ciphertext size as more relevant than public key size. Can you explain why?
And I wouldn't, in answering that question, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily, we think it's more relevant than public key size. We think anytime if the public key size is too large or if the signature or ciphertext size is too large, that's going to present some challenges for some applications. For example, for the chems and encryption, I don't know if we had a case where public keys were small, but ciphertexts were very large. I think they were either balanced, or you had large public keys and small ciphertext like classic release. For the signature case, yeah, there is Sphinx and Picnic, which have the reverse profile. They kind of have the small public keys and the larger signatures. I don't know. It's a concern in either situation for us when we were looking at those. But ultimately, I would say it's just there's some applications that can handle one, some applications that can handle the other. And I wouldn't say that it's necessary that we favored one view more than the other. We think both are potentially problematic in terms of they're not going to be able to be used by everyone. So true, yes, we selected Classic McLeese and Rainbow, which both of those fit that profile. Again, for the chem and encryption, there wasn't a kind of a different option to choose from. For the signatures, it is true that there's Picnic and Sphinx Plus. Sphinx Plus was close to being a finalist. It could even conceivably be standardized at the end of the third round because its security is so well understood. So just judgment call, I guess.
Okay, thank you. So as there is no more question in waiting, I'm going to ask another question. So I'm happy to have time. So you mentioned IP issues a couple of times. How do you assess them? So do you have a team of lawyers? What is your process to assess these issues?
Yeah, so IP issues are always tricky because none of us are on our team, have any real expertise in this, and we can't make legal opinions. NIST does have lawyers, and we consult with them before we make any statements or anything. When we were drafting our evaluation criteria, we made sure that what we said about IP was fine with our lawyers. And they did say that we couldn't exclude patents for this process. So a number of submissions were submitted with patents. When it was the submitters that had the patents, they had to sign statements indicating if they would make the algorithms available royalty-free or not. We obviously prefer wide adoption, so we would like the outcome of this to be royalty-free. So most of the algorithms that are still in the third round, the submitters themselves don't have patents. I think there's just a small number that do, and we're in communications with them to hopefully get them to release those patents. Harder issue is where there are patents which are not from a submitter of a submission. So maybe person A has a patent that might apply to some of the other schemes. We're aware of some of those issues. We're in communication with parties involved, and we are have our lawyers as well to advise us. We're actively working on those. I had a meeting this week where we worked on that issue. It sometimes is a little slow for us because our lawyers take a while to get back to us. This isn't the only thing that they're worried about. They have all sorts of other issues, and so we try and keep them on point as much as possible. And hopefully, it's our goal that by the end of the third round, this will have cleared up everything, so there won't be any wondering.
Okay, thank you. So we have a little bit, just a little bit more time. So I'm going to ask one more. What are you expecting from the community at this stage?
Just keep on doing what you're doing. Keep doing research, look into the security issues, some of which we highlighted on these slides. Keep doing benchmarking, do hardware implementations. Some of the people doing hardware in the second round had expressed to us that there's so many schemes, it's hard to do them all. We hope that with just a smaller number that can be better done. We hope that work on side channel attacks and resistance is done. Really, once these tweaks come out on October 1st, that these are going to be, these are the finalists, these are going to be what's in consideration. And so we want all the details worked out so we're ready to go at the end, and these can be standardized and start getting adopted, because we know that it takes time for adoption and the threat is already existent. So just help with the transition and getting the algorithms ready.
Thank you. Thanks a lot again for your talk and for all the useful answers. So to the audience, if you have more questions, you can still ask them on the discussion forum. So I see that some questions are still being discussed a little bit. So now we have a 10-minute break before the next session. So just enough time to stretch legs. And okay, so see you in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin.
All right, so we are live now. Welcome everyone to the Lattice session of PQCrypto. And our first speaker.
Okay, so
our first speaker is Raymond Zhao, who will be presenting. His paper titled COSAC, which is compact and scalable arbitrary-centered discrete Gaussian sampling over integers.
Okay, so hello everyone. So I'm Raymond Zhao from Faculty of IT, Monash University. Today I will give you a very brief introduction about our COSAC sampler. Okay, so first, our COSAC sampler is basically an arbitrary-centered discrete Gaussian sampler. So this is a key subroutine in lattice discrete Gaussian sampling algorithm, for example, in GPV algorithm, which is typically used in a couple of lattice-based signatures and lattice-based IBEs. However, the existing arbitrary-centered discrete Gaussian sampler usually suffer from a couple of limitations, such as the running speed and the memory consumption and also the flexibility. And unlike the continuous Gaussian distribution, a discrete Gaussian distribution cannot be directly scaled to the target standard deviation. So what we did is we scale a continuous Gaussian distribution to the target standard deviation and perform regression sampling on the rounded samples instead. So our algorithm is essentially a generalization of the regression sampling algorithm from this textbook. And our algorithm has these following advantages. For example, our algorithm has low regression rate compared to typical 8 to 10 in the naive regression sampling or 4 in the distribution method. And our algorithm is also scalable to large standard deviation without sacrificing the efficiency. And also, our algorithm does not require precomputations related to a specific discrete Gaussian distribution or specific sigma. So, okay, so here is just the 3 different distributions we will use in this talk. Basically, we have discrete Gaussian, we have rounded Gaussian, and the distribution from the algorithm used in the textbook. So, okay, so yeah, so basically this is the algorithm from the textbook. So basically you can see the view samples from a distribution which seems to be similar to discrete Gaussian distribution with 2 differences. One is basically you can see there's an absolute value here. The other one is basically you can see there's a fixed center minus 1/2 here. Then what we did is we generalized this algorithm. So basically what we did is first we removed the absolute value and then we replaced the fixed center with a variable c. Then we found that it can still work in some cases. Then the question is how do we extend this algorithm to support all the different c and all the input value? Here is what we did. So first, basically we can take the fractional part of the center, because basically you can just sample from the fractional part of the center, then you add the integer part back to get the sample for your target center. Then basically to sample from d minus cf sigma, then what we can do is basically we shift the center by +1 minus 1. So basically, the brief algorithm is basically here. So basically, first we sample y from normal distribution with center +1 minus 1 and the standard deviation sigma. Then basically we perform the regression sampling over z equal to round result of y with this acceptance rate. And we need to ensure that we can perform the regression sampling here. Then at last, we deal with the zero. Basically, we treat it as a special case. Then this is basically the algorithm. So basically you can see this it was similar to the previous algorithms from the textbook. Basically, we just did a couple of generalization and the shifting of the center. Then also this is the algorithms from here. Then basically for the full algorithms, basically you can just basically we treat the zero case as a zero case. Then basically for the other cases, basically we just use the arguments from the previous slide, and then at last we add the integer part back to the sample. So okay, so the algorithm is very simple. Then here is the expected number of trails for our algorithm. So basically for sigma greater than the smoothing parameter or z, the expected number of trails m has this upper bound. So from here you can see basically if sigma is much greater than this value, then basically the upper bound of the number of trails is close to 2. So okay, so yeah, so another important aspect of the discrete Gaussian sampler is the constant time. So unfortunately, our algorithm is not fully constant time because our algorithm, you can see from the first slide that basically the retention rate will still reveal some information about the sigma. However, this retention rate wouldn't reveal the center. So basically, in this case, our algorithm should be suitable for the constant time implementation of the convolution style lattice discrete Gaussian sampler, basically the packet sampler and also the variant in MP12. So okay, so here's the performance of our scheme. So you can see that for our scheme, the performance is reasonable even for very large sigma to the power of 20. And also our algorithms can be separated as the online plus offline phases. So basically, the online offline means for the offline phases we can generate all the continuous Gaussian samples, and then for the online phases we only perform the retention sampling. So okay, so here's the comparison of the performance of our algorithm with the other methods. You can see, although our algorithm is a bit slower compared to this sort of table-based method, however, you can see this sort of table-based method is not quite scalable. So because you can see even for the sigma only about 32, then you already have this sort of maybe for example more than 100 kilobytes table size. And also our algorithm seems to have a similar performance compared to the convolution method if you only count the online performance. And if we also separate all algorithms to be both online and the offline phases, then the online phase only performance is even slightly faster compared to the convolution method. So okay, so that's all for my talk. So if you have any questions, please refer to the full paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. We are now going to the next presentation quite quickly because I've already took more time than we should have.
Sorry, yeah.
Right, so the next one is so Damon, are you ready?
I am.
Very good. So we had a quick, we have a quick change in the presenters. So because Zhao could not properly connect to his audio, Damian will present his results. His result by Wang and Zhang on showed zero knowledge proof of knowledge for lattice-based connection.
Okay, so thanks.
Damian, you should be the presenter now.
I think I'm good. I can switch slides. Okay, so thanks everyone. So I'm going to give this talk even though I'm not an author of the paper. So that was kind of an emergency backup. an emergency solution. So I have the script. So but I didn't prepare anything. I'm discovering the script as I read. Okay, so hello. Our presentation is on short zero-knowledge proof of knowledge for lattice-based commitment, which is in collaboration with Wang and Zhang. Okay, so our work focuses on short zero-knowledge proof of knowledge for BDLOP commitment relaxed opening. It consists of small modifications of BDLOP commitment and a short proof protocol. Besides, we give concrete instantiations and make a detailed comparison with the original work. Okay, so BDLOP commitment with relaxed opening is the most efficient lattice-based commitment. It applies a sigma protocol for relaxed opening, which can be viewed as an approximate proof of lattice-based Fiat-Shamir signature. Our work begins with an observation that there is a non-trivial shorter proof for BDLOP commitment opening with compression technique. Concretely, when we consider the concrete instantiation for compression in the sigma protocol of the BDLOP commitment, we found it decreases the proof size at the cost of increasing the abort probability and lowering the security level. It seems hard to balance the small proof size, low abort probability, and high security level. Therefore, our question was the following: could we have a shorter proof for an efficient lattice-based commitment at no cost? Our work has a positive answer to this question. Notice that there is a similar structure between the Lyubashevsky 2012 signature scheme and the original Sigma protocol for BDLOP commitment. Inspired by the bimodal Gaussian technique, our basic optimization is to apply a bimodal Gaussian to the original proof protocol. However, adapting the bimodal Gaussian to the zero-knowledge proof of knowledge of BDLOP commitment is not so direct. The key observation is the inconsistent modulus. When utilizing the bimodal Gaussian, we need a modulus 2Q, while for the original BDLOP commitment, it needs a modulus Q. If we trivially expand the BDLOP commitment modulus from Q to 2Q, it will lead to a larger commitment. Thus, in order to decrease the proof size but still retain the commitment size, we need another technique. Our solution is a modulus switching technique between Q and 2Q. In the up phase, we lift the modulus 2Q for preprocessing, while in the down phase, we make a modulus reduction. Finally, we can get a smaller proof size and retain the commitment size. So now we wrap up the above ideas and give a direct summary. Combining bimodal Gaussian with modulus switch, we can optimize the zero-knowledge proof of knowledge. Besides, for more compact parameters, we also make small modifications of a BDLOP commitment. At last, we consider three sets, 1, 2, and 3, of parameters to achieve a weak security, approximately 100 bits of security, medium security, approximately 128 bits, and high security, approximately 256 bits. Under these three sets, for these three sets, our proofs are shorter than the original proof, with the same commitment size and for the same security level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Damian. Now let me switch to the next presenter, to the next speaker. Now Vadim should be able to switch the slide.
Hey, how do I do it? Oh, okay, with the mouse.
Perfect. Okay, let me first introduce you. So the next speaker will be Vadim Lyubashevsky, who will be presenting his joint work with Jonathan Bootle, Anja, Lehmann, and Gregor, on complex privacy protocols from post-quantum and timed classical assumptions.
Okay, thanks, Anja. Yeah, so let me just kind of give an introduction to give the point of what this talk is about. So right now we're about 65 qubits when we're building a quantum computer, and this is kind of the NISC era. So the NISC is like this noisy intermediate scale quantum where the qubits don't quite form logical bits yet. So you just have to kind of a one-shot solution. You have to feed them the question, they do something, and they give you a solution. So IBM kind of publicly promised a 1,000 qubit computer, which will give us one logical qubit in 2023. Then that'll, once you have logical qubits, now you've entered the fault-tolerant era. And Google kind of recently also promised 1 million qubits by 2030. And then you'll have 1,000 logical qubits about. Okay, so you need about 4,000 of them to break RSA. And a different paper said, well, there's a 5% chance of this happening in 2039 and a 50% chance in 2050. So as a warning, all of these predictions were made by different entities, so the dates may not really be consistent with each other. But I mean, they're kind of not too far off either. So this seems to be somewhat of a consensus that maybe 2039, probably, small chance, 2050, good chance. Okay, so then of course the question is, well, I mean, if the classical crypto is only going to be broken by 2050, why do anything now? But we all know the answer is these harvest and decrypt attacks. So somebody can be storing your information now and then only decrypting it later when they have a quantum computer. So you will lose all your privacy in 2050 or whenever a quantum computer is built. Right, so now the options to be secure, of course, again, we know the answer to this, right? So you can switch to a completely quantum safe scheme. So forget, all the factoring stuff, use lattices, codes, hash functions. Since the problem seems to be just the privacy, that privacy will be leaked, what if we consider schemes that only have quantum safe privacy? So quantum safe privacy only. And here's what I mean by this. Here's an example. Suppose you have an encryption scheme and you also want to do a proof of knowledge of plaintext, a zero knowledge proof of knowledge, that you know the plaintext of this encryption. So you want to use an encryption scheme that's quantum safe. Otherwise, later on, they will kind of decrypt your quantum computer will decrypt your secret. And you want the proof of knowledge to be statistically zero knowledge, so the proof of knowledge doesn't leak anything. So again, your secret is safe, even in the quantum era, but we can relax the soundness. So maybe the proof of knowledge has classical soundness. So someone with a quantum computer can forge, but since no one has a quantum computer now, they cannot. Right, so, and also you can even make a stronger, force a stronger thing on the scheme that's saying that forging involves solving a fresh instance of a problem, so no pre-processing. So this is sometimes called quantum annoying. So we've kind of considered this before in this middle ground example with Rafael Delpino et al. So the idea was the following. So let's say you have this lattice-based encryption scheme. It looks like a lattice problem, typical lattice problem over some polynomial ring. AS equals TS is the secret. And so the first thing we do is convert it to a ring over to a problem over ZX. So without the Q, without X to the n plus 1. And then you can do Peterson commitments, so discrete log commitments to the secret S and V using discrete log. And Peterson commitments are, of course, statistically hiding. So no quantum computer is going to reveal what the secret's there. Of course, they're not statistically binding. So you can with a quantum computer, you can make any commitment you want. And then, once you have these commitments, you get a challenge alpha. And the idea is then you use a discrete log-based scheme to prove the polynomial equality of the values on C evaluated at alpha. So, and this kind of implicitly then implies that he really does know S, that AS equals T. So only the soundness of this scheme is classical. So, and this was good because the proofs were very short, 2 kilobytes, but very slow. It took a few dozen seconds. To be fully quantum safe, the proofs take about 50 kilobytes, but they're very fast, just a few milliseconds. So there's a bit of a trade-off here. So then in this paper, to continue this work, we tried something more difficult, group signatures. And the question is, why group signatures? And I think no one really has a good answer as to why group signatures. It's more of, I feel like group signatures like the lab mouse for privacy-based crypto. It's, it contains the basic building blocks of other more useful privacy-based crypto for which we know a reason we want to construct it. And so, before trying a technique on an interesting privacy scheme, try it on a group signature, see what happens. If the group signature survives, maybe try it on something more interesting. So we tried it, and an issue was the difference between what we did before is now that now there's this cryptographic hash function involved, and we have to do these proofs on it as well. So the result was that the group signature size was small, so about 20 kilobytes, so more than an order of magnitude smaller than everything else. But the signing time, we didn't really run it, but we estimated, and there was a lot of exponentiations, maybe more than an hour. So that's not so good. So I would say the signature did not survive. So this exact technique should not maybe be applied later on. But I still think that this time quantum annoying notion may be quite useful if proofs can be done faster. And we only did it one way. We only used kind of bullet proofs, this discrete log-based scheme for the discrete log proof. But there are better ones, probably, at least faster ones, if we can sacrifice a little bit of space. So maybe use those. And I think an even more interesting thing is maybe lattices are not the right quantum safe starting point. Maybe if we use codes or something else, since we're not really doing code-based proofs, we're doing discrete log proofs, maybe they're better over the rings, over the algebraic fields that the codes are on. So I think that's an interesting open problem. And thanks.
Thank you, Vadim. Thanks a lot. I'm gonna take the role of presenter. And our next speaker will be John. John, can you change your slides now?
Great, thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, good. So our next speaker will be John Schanck, who will present his joint work with Nina Bindel on decryption failure is more likely after success.
Great, thank you. So this is on the topic of decryption failures in Lindner-Picard style encryption schemes. So that would be NewHope, Frodo, Saber, Kyber, quite a few of the NIST submissions past and present. In these schemes, a decryption failure tells you that a certain quantity is large in absolute value. So here you have an inner product between two vectors. One is controlled by the honest user, the decrypting party, that's ES, and the other one is controlled by the adversary, that's S prime, E prime. And there's another scalar term added in, E double prime. So when you see a decryption failure, you know that this value is large. And what previous work has done is considered an attacker who tries to find large values of the primed components. So generally, these will be controlled by, they'll be produced by a random oracle. So the adversary doesn't have complete control, but he can, produce a lot of random oracle outputs and then query just the ones that are large. It's a failure boosting attack. And there's also some previous work that says once you find a failure, you can find more by querying geometrically related values. In this work, we take the inverse of the statement. We note that every successful decryption says that this value is small. And a consequence of that is that you can, in principle, gather information from successful decryptions. Geometrically, what this looks like is every one of these query points, the primed, E prime, S prime, once normalized, you can view that as a point on the sphere, and its length controls the size of a cap around that point. You get a decryption failure if the secret lies inside the cap around your query point. So what an intelligent adversary will do is not just try to get large caps, that's the previous failure boosting attack, but they'll try to spread their caps out on the sphere, make sure there's small overlap between them, right? Because if you query a point that overlaps your previous queries, you don't learn anything new in the overlapped region. So an intelligent adversary will try to increase the efficacy of their query set by getting a larger fraction of the sphere covered, while simultaneously trying to minimize the number of queries that they make. And their cost to do this is the cost of finding an efficient query set and also separately asking the queries. So there's two quantities that you could bound in a security proof if you wanted to say, I have an adversary who's allowed to do 2 to the 128 work, and they're allowed to query no more than, say, 2 to the 64 ciphertexts. Okay, and so we looked at the size of a query set that you might need to produce to find a decryption failure with high probability. in a variety of round 2 NIST emissions. So in each one of these plots, as you go farther to the right, the adversary is doing more work to produce each ciphertext. So on the left plot, you can see that the size of the query set that they need to produce is decreasing as they do more work per ciphertext. At the same time, the total cost of the attack, so that's multiplying the size of this query set by the cost to find each query, initially decreases as the query set decreases quickly, and then eventually the cost of finding good queries outweighs the benefit of reducing the size of the query set. Okay. Again, another thing we looked at was just some different definitions of correctness. So in the literature right now, what people generally calculate is what I would call the one-shot probability of failure. So you take a random key and a random ciphertext and just look at what the probability of getting a failure for that pair is. Problem with this is that when you throw a delta-correct CPA-secure scheme through the Fujisaki-Okamoto transform, your correctness takes a loss proportional to the number of hash queries that the adversary is allowed to make. So that might be, say, 2 to the 128. You take a 2 to the minus 144 correct scheme, and you only get a 2 to the minus 16 correct scheme. That's your correctness error. And then this factor shows up in the upper bound on the average advantage. So that's not great. Using our different definition of correctness, which bounds the time and number of decrypting queries separately, we can do a little bit better, but this is still not an upper bound that you'd be happy with in a security proof. Okay, and I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take questions later. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Now we come to the last talk of the session. I'm sorry, I think I inadvertently changed the order of the presentation, and I'm really sorry about that. So I think we need, I skipped the talk on the defeating NewHope with a single trace. And I'm really sorry about that. So let me upload this presentation. And I will make then Dorian the presenter now. And again, I'm sorry, Dorian, for skipping.
Never mind.
Missing you. It was not intentional. Sorry for that. Now I'll make you the presenter, and you should be able to change your slides.
Okay.
Yes, perfect. So Dorian will present his joint work with Lukas, Lundberger, Andreas, Curiger, and Paul Bindel on descending NewHope with a single trace.
Thank you. Okay, so we focused on side channel attacks of NewHope. And so usual or old papers or papers that were published before always focused on finding some private values. And our idea was to use the message encoding because the message which is received is private as well. So I will show you how it's done in the C code, and I will show a power trace, and then I'll have a look if the attack works on Kyber as well, because after the decision of NIST, this is more interesting. And then we'll see what we can do about the attack. Okay. So what you see here is what generally is done in the message encoding. We have just 256 bit of a message. There is a for loop, and the poly is an array. And if the bit is 1, then a constant is set to the poly at this special address, and otherwise a 0. And can change that and say, okay, if the bit is 1, we make a mask with an all one word, otherwise a 0, and then we just make a logical AND. And so this is obviously both attackable with an if, but the way it's actually implemented is this C code here. This is in constant type. You see both for loops here. And then here there is the extraction of the bit, and it's -1 if it was 1. So, and the -1 is exactly in all one word. And this is then the mask, so the same as the left side, and then it's just put into the correct spaces here. Okay, so then we run this on a board from NewAI. It's just a cheap board that everybody can buy, and it's polluted with STM32, so Cortex M4. And this is the power trace that we observed. So it's the voltage on the internal supply voltage. And if we mark the timing exactly, then we can really see it's a single trace. We clearly see which bit is a 1 and where the zeros are processed. So this is really easy, and it even helps that it's constant time, because one can just cut the slides to the times, and there you get the message during the encoding. So now the question is, does it work on Kyber as well? I have here both C codes from the Kyber, the message encoding, and from NewHope. And when I mark 2 lines, you see this is the mask part, and then put it into the array, and this is exactly the same code here. So yes, the attack works, and there are also 2 papers that confirm that the attack works also on Kyber. So what can we do about this? So we made 2 things. We made an FPGA implementation. You hear more of this in the long talk. And we have the microcontroller. So in the microcontroller, one can use randomization so that an attacker knows how many 1s and 0s are in a message, but know where they are. And masking can be used as well. But masking alone is not sufficient, because the attack works on single traces. And with single traces attack, one have to attack 2 message encoding instead of 1, for example, and this does not really help. Okay. And this is my small contribution. We have found this simple power attack on message encoding for NewHope and Kyber. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorian. And now we've actually come to the final talk of this session. Now, let me upload our presentation. Cecilia, could you now check if you can switch the slides?
Yes, I can. Perfect.
Thank you. So this talk will be presented by Cecilia Postini, who will present a joint work with Jan Kamenisch, Max Aksamkin, and Nicolas Spooner on efficient post-quantum snarks for ring SID and ring LWE and the applications to privacy.
Okay, thank you very much. So this work started actually from, we arrived to the main topic of the work from somewhere else, and I'm actually very happy that Vadim gave the talk before me, because he essentially gave a motivation for our paper as well, as in fact we started from what I call, for the purpose of this talk, anonymous signing protocols, essentially signatures such as group signatures that allow the signer to hide some information about themselves. And for the purpose of this talk, we can consider these kind of protocols as built from digital signatures plus non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs. And the idea being the following, that when a user wants to get signing credential, it will contact an issuer, which will then either assign or directly sign the user's identity. And when now a user wants to becomes a signer, it's now time to produce a signature, the user will generate a non-interactive zero-knowledge proof that it has a valid identity that was signed by the issuer. and this can be transformed into a signature using, as usual, the Fiat-Shamir heuristic. And then if we are in the case of group signatures, we also, well, the scheme also allows for to revoke anonymity, and to do that, the user will also have to add an encryption of the identity, as we will see later. So what we decided to start, instead of choosing a lattice-based signature that required to run proofs over the input of a hash, as it would be, for example, for the hashing sign kind of signature or the Fiat-Shamir kind of signatures, we wanted to have a signature where the relations we had to prove were only lattice-based, and that's why we chose Boyen's signatures. And in particular, how it works, this is like a very simplified example of it, is that to sign a small message M, the issuer will generate a small vector S1, S2, and you can think of all the elements here as vectors or over polynomial rings, and the lower letter M and U are elements, so polynomial over the ring. And so on a second, and A, B, and G and U are public elements. So when the user has to prove that it has a signed identity, it has to prove that it knows the small m and a small s, such that the linear equation holds, and some statement about the norm, where the requirement on the polynomial m is due to some technicalities. Now, this could be done, or looks like it could be done with standard Fiat-Shamir with a Bortz proof, but the problem arises here, where in part of the linear equation, we have a term that is actually obtained as a product of secrets. And this proved to be quite complicated to deal in with Fiat-Shamir with a Bortz kind of proof, so we decided to use something else. And instead of using that kind of proof, we decided to use a snark that was published by Bensason et al. At Eurocrypt 2019, which is Aurora. And Aurora allows to prove knowledge of a short vector V in FQ, such that given public matrices A, B, and C, also over FQ, and given another public vector over FQ W, we can prove that we know V such that A times this vector that is composed by V and W multiplied component-wise times B times this weird vector is equal to C times, again, this vector. And the relation itself doesn't look very familiar for people that work on lattices, but actually the presence of this component-wise product in the middle is what helped us to deal with the product of secrets. As in fact, while arithmetic in the Q is already a given, then we were able to prove addition and multiplication by using the entity interest form of the polynomials. And we built a group signature out of it, and we realized the signature size is actually quite small when compared to previous work, even if the time that it takes to produce a signature is still quite high. And we were also able to build a signature with higher security guarantees, but again, higher security guarantees implied for larger signature and even longer times to produce one. So this is it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think now we're done with the talk part, and now we're moving to the questions part. Daniel?
Hi. Okay, so for the moment we don't have too many questions, so don't be shy. If you have questions, ask them the mattermost. So while we don't have questions, I'm going to exploit this free time to ask my questions. Okay, so maybe a question for Cecilia first. Okay, so for these snarks, what kind of harness assumption do you rely on? Where is Cecilia?
Here. Sorry. For what exactly? I didn't.
What type of hardness assumptions do you rely on?
All right. So Aurora is actually, so it was proved in. I have.
You're still presenting, so we can actually switch the slides if you need your other slides.
So for because all right, okay, I couldn't find. So if I'm not mistaken, Aurora relies is statistically sound. Yes, and then the only assumptions, right, okay. And the only, I'm sorry, we haven't worked on this in a long time. And the only assumptions we actually needed in the end were the lattice-based assumptions, so module CIS and module LWE.
Okay. So no random oracle in particular.
I'm sorry?
You don't use any kind of random oracle heuristics.
Yes. We obviously, well, we need to use the random oracle for the group signature because we build the signature as with the Fiat-Shamir heuristic. So we need. I'm sorry that I gave that as granted, but we do need a random oracle assumption in order to prove the security of the group signature.
Ah, okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm really sorry I didn't get the question exactly.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So there is a follow-up question still for you by Vale Varzaliev, who is asking whether you are planning to publish your implementation.
So we don't have an implementation of this full scheme. We used at the time the implementation, given that Nick is actually on the Aurora paper, we used their implementation to simulate parts of the generation of the signature. The problem being that to compute the dimension of the signature for the group signature, we were not, the signature was so big, or the proofs were so big that we were not able to to actually generate it. We had to simulate it. And I think at the moment, the code is still a work in progress as it's part of the Aurora research branch of research. So I'm not sure it's going to be published anytime soon. I need to check with Max and Nick.
Okay, thanks a lot for your answer. Okay, so maybe one question for John.
Yeah, I'm here. I don't
here
know if
you
can
are.
see me.
But, we can see you now. Okay, so I was not too sure what is the difference between your definition of correctness and the one that was used before, I think in particular by HHK. And a related question is whether it impacts also QRAM proofs. So you said that the change of definition impacts RAM proofs, but does it impact quantum random oracle model proofs as well?
So just on the QRAM first, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Nina does. It's not something that I've looked at personally. And then the difference in the definitions is that we bound both the adversary's time and the number of queries that they're allowed to submit. So we're looking at correctness conditioned on an adversary who, say, only does 2 to the 128 work and submits only 2 to the 64 queries. Whereas previous definition, the previous definition, I mean, what shows up in the HHK proof is just a scaled version of the one-shot failure probability, which is you take a random key in a random ciphertext and look at the probability of failure for that pair. The scaling factor there is by the number of hash queries that the adversary is allowed to submit.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So I had another question, but maybe it's completely stupid. I don't know. So there is this other work by Danvers, Rossi, and Virdia. Can it be combined with yours? What does it give? Or is it just...
Sorry, that paper,
So it's the Eurocrypt 2020 paper that somehow shows that once you have found a correctness error, a decryption error, it's easier to find the next one.
Yeah, that can absolutely be combined with our work. So it's a very similar idea. You're noting that there's geometric information in the decryption failures, and then you query, you try to query more points that are close to the ones that you've already, like the failures that you've already found. You'll have a higher probability of triggering a failure. And what we're saying is that you can kind of do something similar for the successful decryptions. You can query away from those points to increase your probability of finding even a first failure.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Okay, so Nina, on the chat, Nina has an add-on to the first question. So in particular, it does affect the quorum proofs. Okay, thank you, John. I don't know, so... Okay, so there is no new question on the Mattermost, so I'll keep asking some questions. Unless Elena, do you have questions also, or no?
Okay.
So maybe one for Dorian. So I was so the attack that you have seems very generic for lattice-based schemes. Basically, it's how you plug the message into the mod queue, how you plug the plain text bit into the mod queue. So are there lattice schemes that don't suffer from this attack, or lattice NIST lattice submissions?
So we didn't check all other or any other, to be honest, implementations or schemes. What I can say is, as long as so the attack works because it's actually an if that we just hide it with this mask. So it's constant time and it's not an if in the code, but at the end of the day, it's just an if. If it's the one, make this, otherwise make it 0. And I think this is what we attack. And and there are other schemes that make it very similar, because I think most messages go in that way into the lattices. I'm not sure about that, but all these are probably can probably be attacked.
Okay, so there is a question also for you on the chat by Sebastian Verschoor, who is asking. So I'm stating the question. So from quickly skimming the paper, it seems the single trace attack only works when compiling with a minus big O0 option. In section 3.3, when you compile with a minus big O3 option, you state that DPA might work. So does it work? And could I conclude from this that compiling with minus O3 is a somewhat effective countermeasure?
Okay, maybe I have to be a bit clear about this, because it was also in the paper review. It was never meant as a countermeasure, and we don't state in the paper that it is a countermeasure. The thing is, I showed the without optimization compile. This is what I showed in the presentation, and here you can just read off the oscilloscope. With O-3, the attack still works, but well, this was not a low noise setup that we had, because we want just an easy, cheap setup. And then we had some 40 guesses. Maybe 2 bits were wrong in the single trace scenario. So if it's a multi-trace scenario, the attack is easy still, and in a single trace scenario, it still works. It's not a countermeasure, but the side channel is less obvious.
Okay, thanks. So I have one more. So it seems mapping 0 to 0 is what makes it easier. So it seems related to the choice of mapping a plaintext bit 01 to 0 and Q/2. So 0 and Q/2, they don't really matter too much, I think, for correctness of the schemes. But what really matters is that the distance between these two values are Q/2. They are far apart. So if you add noise, you can easily distinguish between them. So what if instead of using 0 and Q/2, you were using minus Q/4 and plus Q/4?
Okay, we tested one thing, and so what already helps as well, I think we didn't write it to the paper, if you change the operation, so in the C code we make first this mask, so this all one word, if it's a 1, and otherwise we let it a 0, right? And what can be done is, instead of making this all one can directly multiply a 1 times Q half, and this then the side channel leaks less. It's still visible, but it leaks less. So, and the problem with Q² and minus Q² is that you have to find a way to implement it without the NIF. So you need something like this mask that you have the constant time. So it's quite hard to hide with such an easy trick.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, so I have a bunch of questions for Vadim as well. So just to be clear, you are enjoying all this because not because of me, because Nicola told me to last until 20 past. So hi Vadim. So I don't think you mentioned it during your talk, but that was it was in the longer version of the talk, for sure. So you prove stuff for a random oracle.
Yeah.
So what if this random oracle is just collision resistant? I guess that would make the proof. What is it? What happens if it's only a collision resistant hash? I suppose that would make the proof much easier. But is it still secure or clearly insecure, or no one knows?
But I mean, this is the question of, this is a much more general question. You're asking, are hash and proof signature schemes secure if we replace a random oracle with just a collision resistant hash function? Let's see, I would, I don't know, I would be concerned. Say, I mean, we definitely, yeah, I don't know. I would. I mean, you can also ask the same question about Fiat-Shamir proofs, right? Can we use a much weaker property? I don't know, right? I mean, you could have. I mean, the issue there, I think, what worries me a lot. So actually, yeah, I think I would be. There's a good reason for my concern. You could have homomorphic collision resistant hash functions, right? I mean, lattices. And that would cause a problem, I think, in the hash and sign, because you could then if you could then sum two preimages together, you would get the hash of the output. So I kind of feel like, you know, if you have AS1 equals hash of x and x1, and AS2 equals hash of x2. You have AS1 plus S2 equals hash of x1 plus x2. And that seems like it gives you a signature for a new message, right? Of course, you have to make sure that S1 plus S2 is in the right domain, but that's a bit, homomorphism would concern me a lot.
Okay. So still related to this random oracle, so there is, so I have, I don't know, like a weird impression with it. Usually the random oracle doesn't bother me at all, but here, I don't know, that's something new for me. So in a way, a random oracle is a black box. So you don't look at the black box. You give it some input and it spits out some output, and you don't open it. You just trust that whatever is output is random.
Let me guess. What worries you is you're proving something about it, right?
Yeah. So here you actually dissect it because you prove something. So you have to look at how it works to prove something about it. Yeah. That is. We did discuss this quite a bit, and I think at the end we had a very good sort of way to calm ourselves. If I remembered what it was, but yeah, I mean, no, I mean that's a very interesting question, right? And I think this comes up in other places as well. Let me think about this. So something you can do, right, is just say, look, this is with if we substitute the random oracle with SHA-3, right? Then I'm going to assume that the signature scheme is secure. Right, so forget the random oracle model, right? So it's like you're making one jump, right? So we've proven the random oracle, and now in the real world we're going to substitute with SHA-3, and I'm going to make the assumption, no random oracles at all, that this signature scheme is secure, right? With SHA-3. Now SHA-3 is completely, you know, it's an actual function, so you can start proving things about it. Right, so in a way, you can think of our assumption being not a hash and sign signature in the random oracle model, but think of it as a hash and sign signature where the hash function is SHA-3, and we're saying that's secure, right? Whether or not it's true, hopefully it is, right? If it's not, there's some problem, and then we're proving things about SHA. So that sort of makes perfect. That's no longer anything there. So it's like we have to make an extra assumption here, right? So we're no longer in the random oracle model. We're really assuming that it's secure for a particular hash function. And then you can resolve these issues with, how do we actually define stuff? How do our proofs make sense? But it is a good point that you cannot just say, oh, our things are secure just in the random oracle model. No. The assumption is that the scheme is secure, signature scheme is secure with respect to a particular hash function. Yeah, and at the same time, if that particular hash function were a random oracle, the signature scheme would be secure.
Well, I mean, that second part, like, what does that mean if this hash function were a random oracle, right? I mean, a random oracle is like a model, right? So it's a, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks a lot. It's food for thought.
Sure.
Okay. So do we have other questions? No, not yet. Okay, so I'm not going to ask questions to Yang because so I'm sorry, but that would be very weird. So if I have to answer my own questions. So I have a quick one for Raymond.
Yeah, just good. Yeah.
So there was another paper at this conference. So I was expecting it to be presented during this session, but it was actually presented yesterday in the implementation session. So it's a paper by James Ho, Thomas Prest, Thomas Ricochet, and Melissa Rossi on Gaussian sampling.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems that some of the techniques and some of the results are somewhat comparable. how does it compare with
actually, in our benchmark, we didn't compare with the performance of their sample because actually we figured out that for their sample scheme they have one limitation, that the gap between the maximal and the minimal sigma couldn't be very large, because in their rejection rate you need to times the minimal minimal divided by maximal sigma, basically. So basically, because of this factor, so their in their scheme the gap couldn't be very large. Then in this case, we couldn't really do the benchmarking, right? Because in our case, so basically the gap can be very large. Then, but for their case, the gap couldn't be very large. Then we couldn't do benchmark in this case. So yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for your answer. Okay. So maybe it's time to close this session, unless someone has a question, or it doesn't seem to be the case on the chat. Elena, do you have a question?
I agree with you. I think we should wrap up by now. No, I think I don't have any more questions yet.
Okay, so time to wrap up. So thank you to all the speakers for all your talks.
Including yourself.
And to the audience, so we'll resume at 20 past, I think. Okay, so with the code-based crypto session. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
So hello everybody, welcome to our code-based crypto session. So there will be 3 talks of 5 minutes. The first talk will be given by Gregor. So it's normal if you don't see his face. Due to technical reason, we will only hear his voice. So Shay, it's up to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Are you showing the slides already? Philippe?
Yes, you have the side directly. You can move them with your account.
All right. So welcome to our session. It's about QCM DPC decoders with different shades of gray. And due to technical reasons, we could not show ourselves on the camera. So we put just to show you how beautiful we all are, we showed some pictures. And these are the usual suspects. From left, there is Nir Drucker, the middle is myself, and Dusan Kostic is right. And let's go to 1 minute about what Bike is. Bike is a KM. It's based on QCM MDPC codes. And it is part of the NIST PQC Crypto, now promoted to round 3 as an alternative. And in the short time that I have, I'll just go through the timeline and how things progressed and where we are today. So the round 1 Bike proposal in November 17 proposed only in CPA security. And for CPA security, the decoding failure is a matter of system engineering and not security. So at that time, the parameters were targeted to achieve 10 to the -7, which seemed to be good from the engineering viewpoint. And we were targeting ephemeral keys for forward secrecy. And everything was nice and happy. In 2018, there was a paper by Centrier and Vasseur on failure rate of some decoders, actually with a 1-round decoder, and bit flipping style. And this was studied and published, and there was some proposal to do an extrapolation-based analysis and to try to extrapolate and see how to achieve a very low DFR in order to get a claim for in the CCA security. Now in round 2, the Bike submission actually added CCA secure versions to the KMs. There were several versions, CPA and CCA, and a new decoder. And the decoder was called the backflip. And this was supposed to achieve the sufficiently low DFR with some extrapolation method and hence CCA security. Of course, the flows for the CCA secure versions had to incorporate the Fujisaki Okamoto transform. There were several problems with this round 2 specification. Actually, most are concerning the decoders and the DFR. So the number of iterations of the decoder that the decoder was allowed to perform was not specified, and since the DFR is part of the security definition as not only a system engineering issue, this is something that needs to be set. And it is also a parameter that is needed for efficiency and bandwidth, and in order to make sure that it is possible to implement the decoder in constant time. The second issue was that it was not clear how to apply the HHK paper to the CCA proofs for the Bike flows as they were specified at that time. So in 2019, we published a paper that studied some comparison between constant time decoders And we also defined the backflip class as a version of backflip decoder that has a fixed number of iterations. Then we compared it to the black and gray decoder with a fixed number of iterations. And the main findings were actually that the parameters specified in bike round 2 were not enough in order to achieve the required DFR even with this extrapolation method, and they needed to be extended. But we showed that it is possible to build a constant time implementation of backflip class. And when we did the comparison, actually, surprisingly, the black-gray decoder turned out to be more efficient. Now, we get to our paper that we discussed now at PQCrypto 2020. Here we proposed 3 new decoders based on the black and gray algorithm. We call them black, black-gray, black, and black-gray flip, hence the name, different shades of gray. And we analyzed this as a multi-variable optimization problem where we try to find the smallest block size where the constant time performance of a decoder is minimized, and still you get through some extrapolation method sufficiently low DFR. And our conclusion was that from all of these decoders, actually, the black-gray flip decoder is the optimal one. And actually, this is the decoder that is used in bike round 3. Now, in this conference, already published in 2019, Andreas and Vassar, they did a DFR analysis of backflip classes, as defined already in our previous paper, and reconfirmed that the parameters of bike 2 were too small in order to achieve the desired DFR, and confirmed the recommendation to increase them. Finally, in 2020, we proposed some algorithm to do efficient polynomial inversion, and this allowed fast key generation for version 2. Say this again?
30 seconds, ça va,
30 seconds, and that's it. So, I'll just skip to the last slide, and here we are in round 3 as an alternative candidate, and we are hoping for the best. And you have the details and the references in the slides. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Shay. Now we will go to our second speaker, so Valentin Vasseur. Okay, so let me check the presentation. Okay, so I think we can go. Please, Valentin.
Thank you. So before going into the scientific content of our paper, let me give you some context. So our paper concerns BIKE, which is a key encapsulation mechanism using QCM-DPC codes. And it's a third round alternate candidate for the NIST post-quantum cryptography standardization process. So in the decryption method of BIKE, it uses a probabilistic decoder, and as such, it has a failure rate, or DFR for short. And in order to prove the in-CCA security of the scheme, you must have a really low DFR. So it must be below 2 to the minus lambda. So lambda here is the security level. So think of 128, 192, or 256. So this paper is part of a line of work on the security of BIKE, and more generally on the improving the knowledge of the QCM-DPC decoder. So what we want is to reduce the DFR to get better parameters, and we also want to prove that it is as low as it should be to have a security reduction. So we aim at improving the performance and the confidence on bike. So estimating the DFR is not an easy task, and for this work we rely on a heuristic approach. So here, when I will talk about the DFR, it has to be considered as the average DFR for all the keys and all the possible messages. And it has to be considered as a function of the block size R, and all the other parameters are fixed. Based on our knowledge of the decoder and the previous works, we formulated this assumption that says that the logarithm of the DFR is a concave function in the region of interest. So to see what we mean by this, let's have a look at the illustration. So here, what I call the region of interest is the hatched area, and it's the range of parameters for which the DFR is above our target, so it's above 2 to the minus lambda. And here in blue, you have the typical DFR curve. And of course, we don't know this curve, and what we can do is do simulation, so fix an R value, run enough simulation to have a precise estimate of the DFR, and so we get the black points that we have here. And with these black points, we can draw a tangent on the curve, so it's the red curve. And what the assumption tells us is that the tangent will always be above the curve because it's a concave function. So in other words, it gives us a way to have an upper bound on the DFR. And so this is the basis of the technique that we will use to estimate the DFR. And we will use this technique to find good parameters for efficient algorithms. So one of these efficient decoding algorithm is the backflip. So it's a new variant of the bit flipping algorithm that we designed in this paper. And it keeps the simple logic of a bit flipping algorithm, and it has some additional part in it that makes it closer to a soft decision algorithm through delay. So what I mean by this is that least reliable flips will be reverted after a short time, and most reliable flips will remain flipped for a longer time. So as it approaches soft decision decoding, it has better decoding performance, as we can see in this curve, in which you have DFR curves for different algorithms. So the blue curve is the original, so the classic bit flipping algorithm. The red one is the decoder used in earlier versions of bike, and the brown one is the backflip. And so we can see that for each one of these decoders, you have an order of magnitude of improvement in the decoding performance.
So please go, Julian.
Thanks. So welcome everybody to the last talk of PQCrypto 2020. My name is Julian Renner, and I will present the paper on randomized decoding of Gabidulian codes beyond the unique decoding radius. So I will claim that in code-based cryptography, most systems are based on the Hamming or rank syndrome decoding problem. However, in our opinion, there are also other decoding problems that might be very interesting in the PQCrypto setting. For example, the following one, namely decoding an error of rather large rank weight in a Gaby-Dulin code. So the difference to the problem that I mentioned before is that instead of a random code, we have now a structured code, namely a Gaby-Dulin code. And instead of a rather small weight of the error, we have here a rather large one. And what I mean by large will be clear on the next slide. Now, what was shown is that there can be built efficient crypto systems based on this problem, and these systems have then the potential to achieve very attractive small key and also ciphertext sizes. And what we do in our paper is that we propose basically a new algorithm to solve this problem. And this is, of course, important because looking at the difficultiness of the problem helps us to evaluate the security of these schemes. And therefore, this is very important. Okay, let's define quickly the problem that we are looking at. As I said, we have a Gaby-Dulin code, and we assume that the structure of this code is known. So not like in the GPT crypto systems or something like that, where you want to hide the structure. Here, we really assume that the structure is known. Furthermore, we are given an integer w, where w is larger than n minus k half and smaller than n minus k. And we have a vector r. And this vector r is a code word of the mentioned Gaby-Dulin code plus a vector e. And this vector e can be seen as an error. And the rank weight of this vector e is equal to w. And then the objective of the problem is to find a code word, or more precisely, any code word of the given Gaby-Dulin code that is in rank distance at most w from the given vector r. And I write here c hat because this vector c does not necessarily have to be exactly the same as this vector c, but any c fulfilling this one is a valid solution to the problem. And we will see that there are often multiple solutions. Okay, so many people tried to find polynomial time algorithms to solve this problem, but so far nobody was successful. And in the coding community, it's also conjectured that this is actually a hard problem, but there is not really a complete formal proof that this is actually hard. It's only partly proven. Okay, let's see at the algorithm that we developed to solve this problem. This is, as I said, not a polynomial time algorithm, but an exponential time algorithm. And the idea of the algorithm is the following, namely, assume you're given a subspace B hat, and you feed this into the Gaby-Dulin error erasure decoder. Then this Gaby-Dulin error erasure decoder succeeds if the following condition is fulfilled, namely if the dimension of this given subspace B hat and the intersection of the row space of the error is larger than this quantity. Now, the problem is that we don't have any information about the row space of the error in the problem. So what we do is that we randomly guess this subspace B hat and feed it into the Gaby-Dulin erasure decoder. If the decoder fails, then we just guess another B hat. If it succeeds and outputs a valid code word, then our algorithm outputs this valid code word. And we can be sure that this is a correct solution to the problem. So you might guess already that the probability that a randomly chosen B hat fulfilling this condition is rather small, and you're right. And this actually also determines the work factor of our algorithm, which is shown down here. We have here a term n squared, which is basically the complexity of running the Gaby-Dulin error erasure decoder once. Then we divide it by the probability that our randomly guessed subspace has a large enough intersection. And we multiply here by a calligraphic n, which refers to the fact that there are multiple solutions to the problem. Then we can estimate this and also lower bound it by this quantity here. Now, what we showed in our paper further is that we compared this algorithm to existing approaches to solve the problem. And it turned out that for most of the parameters, our algorithm performs better or even much better. Okay, that's from my side. If you have any questions, please reach out to us.
Okay, thank you for your talk and restricted time. So now we will have a seance of questions, which is managed by Jean-Pierre.
Okay, so there will be a first question which comes from Daniel Apon, and this will be about his understanding is that so far all the constant time decoders for byte are analyzed for DFR in some experimental empirical sense. They look good enough in practice for CCA, but we don't have a rigorous mathematical only proof that the DFR will be sufficiently low. Is this right still? How optimistic are you that there will be an efficient constant time decoding algorithm for byte that also has a mathematical proof of that the DFR is below 2 to the security parameter, say in the next year or so? So, Shai, your comment on this?
Sorry, and Valentin too.
So I think that for byte we have a proof already that the byte with the new flows are such that if you have a proven DFR, a decoder with a proven DFR, then it is CCA secure. Another question is whether or not you have a proof or you trust the extrapolation method, maybe improved extrapolation. This is what remains.
Okay. Maybe actually Valentin is also Valentin could also comment on this maybe.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we could I think we could do a work that is similar to what was done for Decrypt, where they analyzed a two-iteration decoder. I think there was some issue with the analysis, for example, on the first iteration, and the fact that they do not take into consideration, for example, the quasi-cyclicity of the code. But if we correct this and if we do a similar analysis to what they did, I think you will have parameters which are around the same as those of HQC or maybe a bit bigger. But I believe there is a way to improve this and have some better proof. And we'll have a proof with a better parameter size.
Okay. I have also a question for you from Angela Robinson. So, who asked if you have extended your decoding performance comparison to include the decoders from the first talk?
So I don't have the curve, but I believe if, for example, we are talking about the black-gray decoder, so how it is in the figure I gave with the three curves. So I believe it will be below the red curve, but it will still be above the brown curve, the curve about the black flip.
Well, let me just comment that all of this was already done in the previous paper, the study of comparison between all the black-gray decoders and all of the variants, and we have a constant time comparison with optimized code for all of them, and we know what is currently the best place in the...
But this one was done for only 10 iterations of the backflip decoder, right?
This was done for all of the numbers of iterations that are practical, so that we know exactly how to specify an efficient, constant time, constant number of iterations decoder. And this was done in the paper.
I think there is an interesting property of the backflip is that if you do more iteration, you will often improve the performance. So if you do 10 iteration, if you do 20 iteration, you will do better than 10 iteration, and so
Our
on.
paper we already showed what performance you get with 20 iterations.
And I believe with the black-gray decoder, you reach a limit sooner than with the backflip decoder. So I think the backflip decoder gives you more way to find a good trade-off between the performance and the efficiency.
Current literature and timeline actually shows different.
Okay. I should add a comment given by Daniel Appon on the chat, who says, I guess I should also say that it doesn't seem required to get such a proof or buy to be standardized, but it would be in a stronger position if so. If you are left only with extrapolation style of analysis, then it becomes more of a judgment call in the end. And okay, so okay, time is running fast. I will ask a question to Julian Renner, which will be the following. So basically, you randomize decoding of Gaussian codes beyond the unique decoding radius with generic decoders, so working for any code, and show that sometimes they outperform actually these generic decoders. Right now, the best generic decoders are obtained by an algebraic technique based on modeling this decoder, the decoding problem with an algebraic system, and solving it with Grobner basis techniques. Well, there's some hope to speed up these decoders by using the fact that when you decode Gaussian codes and not any, rank metric code, because they are highly structured, you get an algebraic system which looks much nicer. For instance, if you write an algebraic system corresponding to expressing the decoding problem for Gaussian code with Q polynomials, I mean, the usual thing that you do actually if you set up actually this key equation, then basically you get a bunch of linear equations for free here. And basically enough when you are to decoding radius and not enough if you are above it. And so probably actually Grobner basis techniques will perform much better on this system. Have you tried this approach?
Actually, we did not do it yet. So there is one paper which we also cite in our PQ publication, where they tried to solve it via Grobner basis. But actually, they did not present any complexity results, and therefore we could not compare the complexity to them. And for us, it was not really obvious at this point what the complexity is. But of course, there's the possibility that this outperforms our combinatorial approach. So I agree on that, but we didn't try it yet.
Okay. So I'm just looking at the chat. Yes.
And I think
I have a question for Julian. So in the case of Ritz-Lehrman code, so there is a proof that decoding up to maximum likelihood distance is NP complete. So of course, before designing a problem with the Gaussian, which are kind of equivalent of Ritz-Lehrman codes, so as far as I know, there is no such proof. So we don't know anything of the real difficulty of the problem. So did you try to do a kind of generalization of that proof? I tried, but for myself, I didn't manage to do it. So did you look at this? Because it will be an important point to be sure that the problem is really difficult in the end.
So I completely agree with you. It would be very important and also very interesting to really make proofs there and see that this is actually a really hard problem. Actually, I tried it not very hard, just a very short time, and I was also not successful doing that. I have the same problem, but I totally agree. It would be very interesting to prove that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any further questions. Anyway, the Mattermost chat will be open for 1 week. So the speakers and other people, you know, welcome actually to add questions, to answer the questions on this chat. Okay, so thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.